All right, so next up, after today's quiz, the next thing you have to do for grading is homework 6. That's due on Friday. And then next week is the really busy week because you've got an assignment due on Wednesday, and that same day is the exam. Now clearly, if you're turning in the homework assignment at noon on Wednesday, you're not going to get your grades back on that assignment before you start the exam, because we start the exam at the same time, right? So if there's any particular problem that you're not sure if you did it correctly and you want to check your work with me, feel free to stop by my office and I'm happy to go over it with you to check your answers. I mean, in a lot of cases, you're probably pretty confident whether you did it right or not. But for these assignments where there's kind of an instantaneous turnaround between when you turn it in and when you're being assessed, I do want to make that an option that's available to you. There shouldn't be any suspense. So feel free to see me if you have any questions on either of those assignments, including checking your answers for assignment number 7. All right, so today we're going to continue our discussion of comparing alternatives and the extension of present worth analysis that we didn't talk about last time. So last time we did talk about the LCM approach, and this was the reason we started discussing the different tools that we've got. Thank you. Why is it that these two cash flow diagrams can't be compared directly? Because they have a different time scale. And so we know that you can't compare two alternatives if they last a different useful life. You can't directly compare the Honda, which lasts for 10 years, to the Hyundai that may only last 7 years. All right, so this was the issue. This is why we can't compare them directly. LCM was one approach that we used, and that's where we repeated the cycles. And so you do have an LCM problem on the homework assignment, and some of you have already identified that one. So another method that we have for comparing the alternatives is to, hold on a second. All right, it's called the contract services approach. And so look at the cash flow diagram and try and determine what do you think happened based on the name and based on what you see on the cash flow diagram. If this was the natural comparison of A and B, what would you have to do in order to compare A and B? If we're calling it contract services, what do you suppose the idea is behind this comparison? I guess that's as good a guess as any, but that doesn't happen to be it. That's not it. Contract services, what do you think? Here in option A, it looks like in years 7, 8, and 9, you're having to pay extra in order to somehow have equipment on hand to do the task. So think if you're a contractor, or like if you're in the construction business and you used to own a bulldozer, but now your bulldozer's worn out, what you can do is you can go to an equipment rental place and you can rent the item rather than owning it. And probably, you know, like on a per day basis, it's more expensive to rent the item than if you owned it yourself. But that's what's happening here in option A, is that option A wore out after 6 years, and so what this person did was they went and rented the item for year 7, 8, and 9. And it cost them $4,000 each year to rent the item, but in doing so, that enabled to continue their work through the study period. And that phrase study period means it's the amount of years that allows us to compare option A and option B. The study period is 9 years because that's the minimum amount of time that's going to allow us to compare A and B if we somehow find another piece of equipment to act as a substitute in the remaining 3 years of option A's life. All right, so this is contract services. That's an illustration of the second way that we can compare things that have a different useful life. And to distill it, it means just rent the item when it wears out. Lease, renting, contract it out. It may mean that you're hiring someone else to do the job. But it's just trying to find a way to extend the life of the shorter one. Because remember, of the two options, naturally, one is longer and one is shorter. So LCM said, let's repeat it until it finishes at the same year. Contract services says, make the short item longer. And then the early termination approach says, take the item that lasts longer and somehow terminate its useful life early. And that doesn't mean just like drive it into the river and walk away. It means take the item that still has some useful life and sell it on the open market. And so find someone to purchase it. And so you see this green arrow. What it means is that instead of keeping the item in service, instead of this option B, instead of allowing it to go through its natural 9 years of operation, terminate it early, sell the item, and then they both now last only 6 years. But you can see what we're going to have to do is find P given A in order to find how big this green arrow is. Sometimes that data is given directly. You may have resale data versus time, or you may be given information for how to discount these remaining years into a given year 6. There's a variety of ways to handle that, but to summarize, in early termination, what you're doing is you're selling the equipment early. And in doing so, you forego these future revenues. All right, I thought about putting a question on the quiz that was just going to ask, explain LCM. And if I asked you in a concept question like that, you'd not only want to tell me what it is that you're repeating it, but you'd also want to explain why it's used. Like the underlying need for that method. What is it? So it would kind of be implied two-part question. What is it, and like why is it important? Here, if I asked you to explain the early termination approach, you'd be explaining, well, rather than keeping the equipment through the full useful life, you sell it early. But then the second part of that explanation would be, why are you doing it in the first place? And the whole point of the early termination approach is so that you can compare two pieces of equipment with different useful lives. So always take a step back and consider the context of the method. Why is it being implemented? In what circumstances? All right, so to get some additional practice with the present worth analysis, I have an in-class exercise for you today where you're using both contract services and early termination. Here is the contract services. We're actually going to do the same one that was just from the illustration. Let me hand out the paper for this. We're going to discount at 4%, and I've got the 4% table on the paper for you. Are there any questions about either of these methods? Yes. Yeah.
This is just an arbitrary amount for the example,
yeah.
Like set up in a problem and say, well, it's going to cost us X amount of dollars per year to rent this equipment, or is there like an algorithmic approach to use the A value from
Good
option
question.
B to calculate that value?
No, it would be given, and it would vary from equipment to equipment.
So it's not based off the original.
Nope, it's not some function of the original cost or
even the other option.
I mean, it all depends on like how good is the rental market, how much of profit are they trying to make. It depends really on where you get it. So it can vary a lot. Yeah. Did everybody get a copy of today's in-class exercise? Thank you. So here's the comparison. 16.9 versus 14.285. and we want to maximize our profits. So the decision criteria, and that's an important phrase, decision criteria, is choose the larger of the two present worths that's positive. If they're both negative, it doesn't matter which one's larger because you're going to say no to both. But in this case, they're both positive, so the one we choose, assuming it's mutually exclusive, is the one that's bigger. So the tricky part is the fact that this 4,000, it's a two-step process to get it to year 0. We have to move it from years 7 through 9 to year 6 with find P given A. And then we move it from 6 to 0 with find P given F. So that's why I've multiplied by two consecutive factors. I multiplied it by 2.7751, and that's what takes it to year 6. And then I multiplied it by 0.7903, and that's the factor that takes it from 6 to 0. All right, so I'm going to leave that up on the screen. If some of the rest of you have finished the second one, let me have a look, and I'll tell you if you got it there. You did. You got it. Good job. So let's see here. Okay, yep, perfect. Nice work. You've got it. Good. 11 it. You nailed it. Good job. Bye-bye. Yep, that is right. Good. Exactly. And why? You know, like we like option A because it has a higher present worth. Yeah. Yep. So what we're doing is you can't compare them if they have a different life. 6 years versus 9 years, not allowed to compare directly. So what we have to do is make them the same amount of time. And so on this one, early termination means we'll sell this one in year 6. So here this tells you its value. So you cross out 7, 8, 9, so we're not taking those revenues, and instead there's one extra amount in year 6. Yep. Good. Nicely done. That's it. Good job.